guys? It's your boy Gsluke here for another course breakdown, this time for the Zurich Classic in TPC Louisiana. This is a unique venue and a unique format for sure. This is the team play week. We have teams of 80 of them in the field, going head to head in both a best ball and alternate shot format. On top of the setup, we also have another Pete Dye specialty for a golf course for players to try and dissect, and of course a lot of strategy involved with these type of venues as well. Here in this video, we'll be giving you a complete breakdown of this week's field and the format for this week to make sure you know exactly what's going on, and of course a breakdown of TPC Louisiana and what to expect from the venue. By the end of this, whether you're playing DFS, placing outright bets, or just watching the golf tournament trying to have a good time, you're going to have a great idea of what to expect this weekend. That's my goal, trying to give it to you in as concise a format as humanly possible. So let's go ahead and hop right on into it. All right, we'll start off with the format this week. It is a 4-round event like usual PGA Tour stops, but we're gonna have 2 days of best ball, that being on Thursday and on Saturday, and 2 rounds of alternate shot, Friday and Sunday. In the past, it had been alternate shot before best ball, but they swapped it around, perhaps to add a little bit of drama. When you have alternate shot, by far the more difficult of the 2 formats. On Sunday, also with that type of pressure, I would expect to have a little bit more of entertainment, maybe guys going up and down the leaderboard, and perhaps a true champion under pressure being crowned. So I'm glad they made that change. So again, you're gonna get best ball before alternate shot for 2 days and 2 days. The field size is 80 groups of 2 players, so 160 players. This is the largest field you're going to have in the PGA Tour schedule. And as a result, not as many people making the cut because it is the top 33 groups and ties making the cut, making this, along with the volatility when you have these type of group play events where a lot of these lower tier teams might get off to a really hot start, it's going to be a hard cut to make. So in terms of 6 of 6 percentages, in terms of outright bets, there's going to be quite a bit of inherent volatility as you get from year to year here. I mean, last year, a group like Morikawa and Wolf ended up going out there and completely crapping the bet, missing the cut. A lot of people had bets on that group, that sort of thing. Just expect that volatility with this type of format. Some of the field notables, some of the groups we definitely want to keep an eye on. First off would be the Morikawa and Hovland group. So rather than being with Wolf this time around, Morikawa went and snagged Hovland, making them by far the favorites at this venue. Both of them, some of the best ball strikers on tour, so that's definitely a group to keep an eye out for. We also have Smith and Leishman, who won last year. They're back together this year. Sergio and Fleetwood, which are 2 European Ryder Cup stalwarts, going to be together. Definitely a group of ball strikers to keep an eye on, particularly with how good Fleetwood has been playing of late. We have Scotty Scheffler, world number 1, playing with Ryan Palmer, another really solid group. We have Lowry and Poulter, another group of Euros that could be really solid here. I mean, Poulter, when you put him in a group play format, any type of format where there's match play, I mean, it's not going to be match play this week, but where there's a team format, a common goal between multiple players, he always seems to step up. We have Horschel and Burns, which has been a common group here. Same thing with Xander and Cantlay. Those groups will be back together for this event. We have Bubba and HV3, 2 of the more comedic guys on tour, some of the better guys to play golf with on tour, so I'm sure that's going to be a fun group to watch. Homa and Taylor Gooch. We have the 2 Chileans together, Joaquin Niemann and Mito Pereira. I love both of those guys. Both really stud ball strikers, so that could be a really solid group to look at. You have 2 of the KFT people that came up this year. That would be Will Zalatoris and Davis Riley. Both of them were really close on the Korn Ferry Tour. So good to see that they're getting together for this team play event, keeping that camaraderie alive. And lastly, the last group we're going to touch on, there's a lot of really good groups out there, would be Thigala and Hosler, who played a ton of golf in their high school and even middle school days out there on the West Coast together. So good to see that they're getting back to their junior golf roots and making themselves a team. In terms of the cut line, it is the top 33 teams and ties. Like I said, it's usually well under par, at least 4 or 5 under par. Last year it was 6 under par, and I would put the range on that anywhere between 4 and 7 under par, maybe even better than that if we have really benign conditions. So you're definitely going to have to take it low in the best ball format, which of course, I guess I'll go into detail. If you're not familiar with those, best ball means that both players in the group are going to be playing their own ball. So whoever scores the best on that hole is a score that you take, and usually you're looking to shoot 7, maybe even 12 under par in that format. This is a par 72. We've seen some 60s, some 61s in the past. So that's why the cut line is as low as it is. You're going to take it to at least 7, 8 under par in that format. You're not going to have very many bogeys to speak of. And if you're not bringing a hot putter, if you're not able to make a bunch of birdies, you're definitely going to be behind the 8 ball to make the cut. So that's why we see the cut line down there, -5, -6 under par. And the other format, alternate shot, is exactly what you would expect. One guy hits the drive shot, one guy hits an approach shot, so on and so forth, until you get the ball into the hole. And whoever drives on one hole ends up hitting the second shot on the next. So that's why it's called alternate shot. Pretty straightforward with that format, but with best ball, of course, it's just the best score on each hole. So with that being said, the winning score here is usually well under par, close to 20, maybe even 25 under par. Last year, the winner was -20, being Cam Smith and Mark Leishman. I know I talked about them a little bit before. In 2019, your champions were John Rahm and Ryan Palmer. 2018, it was Horschel and Scott Piercy. And the year before that, it was Cam Smith once again, so multiple-time winner here, along with Jonas Blixt. All right, now that we've gone over the format and what to expect, at least from the rules this week, let's talk about the golf course. TPC Louisiana, another Pete Dye specialty, just a gem down there in the bayou over near New Orleans, only about 10 minutes away from the city. So a lot of people play this golf course in this area. It's meant for the public. It's a TPC golf course, but designed more for your resort style guests than your PGA Tour pro. And this is a true swamp golf course. It lays below sea level, much like a lot of golf courses in South Florida. Same thing over here at TPC Louisiana. And it also plays extremely receptive. Anytime you have a golf course under sea level, it is going to be next to impossible to dry it out. Even if you have sub-airs like they have here at TPC Louisiana, really only going to do so much. And they can only put sub-airs on some of the holes here because of the fact that it's underground. There's some standing water in this area. There's some greens that you're just not able to put that type of system in. So that's something to keep an eye on here. Something else to note about the area is that Hurricane Ida put a real hurt on it. Last year, about 600 trees ended up being derooted, taken out of this golf course. Now, they planted 400 to replace a lot of them, but the tree that is in the middle of the fairway on hole number 11 was removed. There's quite a few forested areas that are now wide open. So this iteration of the Zurich Classic is going to look a lot different than in years past. There's been quite a few renovations done outside of the trees. You also have every single bunker on the property was made smaller in size, also made to drain much better, which means that you have steeper slopes on them. You're not going to have quite as flat a lie in any of these bunkers. And they've also been made smaller, which if you know anything about bunkers, the smaller and smaller they are, the higher and higher chance you have of having a really crappy lie. So that is something that they've done. They've also added a ton of runoff areas. You had some standing water that would occur here because it's below sea level on some of the greens, also in some of the fairways. So they've added runoff areas across the entire property. Their goal, in quote, was to make this place drainable even though it was below sea level, which is extremely difficult to do. So as a result, these greens are going to have more undulation towards the sides, of course, running a lot of the water off of the greens. And even in the fairways, you're going to have runoff areas into the water now, which wasn't the case before. They've had to add these runoff areas to avoid them flooding because of course, the hurricane really exposed that need for them. And the GSCAA made that extremely clear in the report this week that you're going to see quite a few changes to the golf course. In terms of a Pete Dye impact here, of course, he didn't have anything really to do with these renovations. They were mostly just done by the field staff there, a lot of the superintendents. They're not massive changes, but when you're breaking down a golf course, really trying to get down to the nitty gritty, it can make differences here. This is, again, a little bit more of a calm down Pete Dye golf course, more meant for resort guests than it is PGA Tour specialists. He wasn't given the task of making an extremely difficult golf course. So as a result, not all that much undulation on the greens. You're looking at probably 2 to 5% slopes at the very most. Nothing like you saw at Augusta National or even at a golf course like Austin Country Club, where you really had to use your imagination quite a few times. You also have larger fairways here at TPC Louisiana, and because it's in a swamp, it's also extremely receptive. So you're not going to be dealing with really firm and fast conditions. That's typically why you see scoring here be relatively benign. You see the scoring average be well below par, even in the alternate shot format. Something else to keep an eye on here is that it's a par 72, which is your typical setup right on tour. And it's your usual setup at that. 4 par 5s, 4 par 3s, regular allotment of par 4s. And in terms of the dog laying from left to right or right to left, you have about an equal distribution of right to left shots and left to right shots. Most of the par 4s dogleg from right to left, requiring a draw for a right-handed hitter, and a lot of the par 5s dogleg from left to right. So of course, if you have a lefty and a righty on your team, perhaps that's that's a little bit advantageous. I believe there's only one, maybe two lefties in the field. I know Bubba Watson he's playing with HV3, so perhaps that's a little bit of an advantage to them because they're going to have both ball flights, just with Bubba Watson alone there in that group. But of course, having a lefty and a righty can make for a slight advantage there. In terms of the scorecard yardage, it's 7,425 yards. So slightly extended from what we saw last year, which was just 7,400 yards, but a 25-yard difference isn't going to be noticeable really whatsoever. And in terms of a general distance here, 7,400 yards isn't all that bad. For par 72, that's right around the tour average. So it's not going to really emphasize players that are accurate or long off the tee. Just if you're going to be solid with your shots gained off the tee, it is going to be a help at this venue like it is for pretty much every course on tour. The greens here are slightly smaller than the tour average. They're 5,225 square foot per green, which again is right around 400 square foot than the tour average. So they're really receptive, so it kind of makes up for that fact. The green and regulation percentage here at TPC Louisiana is above the tour average. The green speed, they're running at 12s per the GSCAA, which is faster than what we saw at the RBC Heritage, believe it or not, but still slower than the PGA Tour average. And they are a Bermuda grass overseeded with Poa trivialis. So the same overseed situation that we've seen for the last 2.5 months at this point, which we're going to talk about the key stats a little bit later, is going to make it very simple for us to get these putting stats, right? We're going to look at the last, let's say, 8 events on tour and just pick out those shots gained putting stats and run with them for this week, because it is the same situation because of some of the general weather trends down here in the Southeast, where we've played pretty much all of our golf for the last 2.5 months. Every course has had that Poa trivialis overseed. There's been quite a bit of uncharacteristically cold weather in the area. I could just tell you, as somebody that lives in the area down here, over the last 2.5 months. So that's why that's been the grass du jour for all of these golf courses, particularly these high-level golf courses. The fairways are right about the PGA Tour average in terms of their average width, but for a Pete Dye golf course, they are a lot larger than average, so that's why I mentioned that before. But you're looking at a relatively high fairway percentage here, particularly because this is a easy format. Celebration Bermuda grass being the grass type there. And for the rough, it is substantial rough. We have 2-inch rough here, which isn't amazing, right? It's not like what we had at the API or the US Open where it gets in that 3 to 4 inch range, but compared to what we had at Augusta National, Austin Country Club, or even last week where the rough was pretty much non-existent over there at Harbor Town, definitely more of a factor to hit the fairway this week. So it's a TIFF Sport Bermuda, not a surface that we see very often, but anytime we have a Bermuda grass rough, getting over the 1.5 inch mark is going to be something to at least consider. In terms of elevation change, pretty much no elevation change here because it's in a swamp. So the only elevation change you're going to see is man-made, whether it be tee boxes, that type of thing. And in terms of weather, it could become a factor because this is a relatively flat piece of property. There are quite a few trees, but it is a swamp, so it's not like you're dealing with heavily forested tree lines or anything like that. You're going to get some winds that come through there. So if it gets in that 15 to 25 mile an hour range, could be something to keep an eye on, but of course just a little bit too early in the week to keep an eye on any type of forecast. So make sure to keep an eye on that as the week progresses. All right, and now hopping into the key stats for my analysis. One thing to note, not going to have a hole-by-hole breakdown this week. Just want to go ahead and change it up, see if I can make this a little bit more concise because it seems like quite a few people skip through it. Now, perhaps you really enjoy it. If you do, make sure to go ahead and comment down below letting me know that, because if people want it to stay around, I'll include it in videos going forward. But in terms of the analysis, it's something that I can talk about during the details just now, or of course when we go through the key stats, some of the more nuanced things to talk about at this golf course. So gonna hop into the key stats, what I'm looking at in terms of trying to identify my favorite players this week. Number one's going to be shots gained approach, which if you've been here on the channel, this isn't your first course breakdown. You know that's to be expected, so not gonna really harp on it too much. But the one thing specifically to identify about TPC Louisiana is that it is a well-balanced approach course. You're gonna get shots for pretty much every single proximity range, whether it's the wedge play, the mid irons, and that 150 to 175, or even your 200 plus shot iron shots. You're gonna have pretty much one of everything. You have some long par 3s here, some short par 4s, some long par 4s, par 5s that are reachable, par 5s that are pretty much unreachable as well. So you're going to have a very nice variety out there, which means we could pretty much just take a look at shots gained approach in general. We don't have to try and hunker down on the 150 to 175. We don't have to hunker down on guys that are really good with their wedge play. You want them to be good at pretty much everything. So that's what we're going to say for shots gained approach, going to be the number one key stat I'm looking at. And number two, we have shots gained putting, but specifically on Bermuda grass overseed. Now that we've had 2.5 months of the situation where every single golf course has usually been a Bermuda grass surface, but it's had this POA triplus overseed, we have enough of a sample size to act off of. So what I'm going to be doing is taking a look at recent form on these surfaces because they are so similar to each other. You can see a little bit of grain on them. That, of course, is the Bermuda grass bleeding through on the underside, but it's a majority POA, which means you have to be a little bit more aggressive. You tend to get a little bit unlucky on the surface. Because it is a POA, it grows throughout the day. You'll get a little bit of imperfections, particularly for the PM wave. So if you're playing Showdown, there's a larger difference between the morning and the afternoon wave on these type of a surface. So that is something, if you're playing Showdown, to perhaps include in your modeling. But in terms of looking at potters, particularly over the last 2.5 months, I'm looking at a lot of that recent form on these surfaces. The only golf course that hasn't had this surface was the Masters. So every other golf tournament over the last 2.5 months, we can use that type of data. And number 3 is what I'm going to call, and now this is a stat that I'm just using this year. It's something that I've thought of over the last week, and something I'm going with this year is going to be a quote unquote best ball shots gained for a team. So it's going to be like a Frankenstein method of making the best shots gained golfer out of the 2 golfers in a team. So if somebody's really good off the tee, one's really bad off the tee, the quote unquote Frankenstein golfer is going to have the guy that's of course really good off the tee, so on and so forth for all 4 stats. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add up their shots gained total and make a way to quantify that with my modeling. I'm going to try and find a way to encapsulate complementary golf. We always hear about that with analysts. You hear Nick Faldo talking about how these guys have complementary skill sets, and all that means is that one guy that's bad at something, the other guy can make up for it, right? Maybe he gains where the other guy loses with his shots gained categories, and that is quote unquote good, right? Yet year in, year out, we never try to quantify that in terms of data. So I'm going to do so, right? I'm a numbers guy, I'm an engineer. This isn't a perfect science, but I'm going to try and do my best to try and encapsulate that. So the guys that have a well-rounded skill set, when you combine both of their shots gained metrics, should get a little bit of boost in the modeling. And that's how I'm going to go ahead and encapsulate that. Now, if 2 players on a team are good at the exact same things, a lot of times people expect that to be good too. But for me, right, that's a little bit disadvantageous, right? You're not really able to take advantage of that, particularly with the alternate shot format. That's really all where it matters, right? When you're playing best ball, you're playing, your own shots. The other guy's skill set really doesn't matter. Whereas in alternate shot, right, you want to, hit a good iron shot, and then the next guy hit a really good putt and hopefully make a birdie. Or if you miss with your iron shot, hopefully the next guy's really good with his around the green play. So this is how I'm going to try and encapsulate that. It's the first time I've done this, so I have no back testing to go off of for this type of data, but in terms of just a logic standpoint, I think it holds up. So it's certainly something that I'll be looking at. In terms of the rest of my key stats here, I have shots gained off the tee as another key stat there. Of course, it's not a long golf course, but it's also not very short. So making sure you can gain off the tee is going to be helpful. Also looking at birdie or better percentage, that is going to be helpful with the best ball format, just trying to go low, take it to that 60-61. Team play records, also something to look at. So guys that have played at this event in the past have played in Ryder Cups, President's Cups, but there are similar type of formats, particularly with alternate shot. It's going to be something that I'm considering. And with teams that have been together, with Sam Burns, Billy Horschel, Cantlay and Xander Schauffele that have played in multiple of these events together. That's also something that will give them a boost. Recent form, of course, and the last key stat is going to be par 5 scoring. Because you're looking to take this to 20, maybe even 25 under par to win, you're going to have to take this place low, particularly on the gettable holes. All right, and now for our comp courses. First off, going to have TPC Sawgrass, the stadium course, home of the Players Championship. Visually, pretty much a carbon copy. A lot of tree-lined fairways, and when you don't have those tree-lined fairways, a lot of times it's because there's a water hazard, a swampy area, and of course Sawgrass also built on swampy land up there in Jacksonville. So from a visual standpoint, from a feel standpoint, it's going to be a lot of similarities there. It's also a Pete Dye golf course, more of a precision golf course than a power golf course. Now, the difference is the difficulty. The Players Championship stadium course, a lot more difficult than what you're going to have at TPC Louisiana, but in terms of a skill set, perhaps trying to comp some of the finishes from one golf course to the other, I certainly think that's a productive exercise. Next up, we have PGA National, the champion course, as home of the Honda Classic, another position golf course, a lot of water in play, also built on a swamp down there in the Florida Everglades. my neck of the woods down here in South Florida. Also a very solid comp here. You got to be extremely accurate off the tee, so perhaps it's a little bit even more so positional than what we're going to have here at TPC Louisiana, but also very similar from the visual perspective and from, of course, the skill set perspective, which is the more important thing here. And lastly, the last comp course is going to be PGA West, also the stadium course, a very similar course to TPC Sawgrass, just more of a desert feel. So it comes in at number 3 because it doesn't pass the visual perspective, but in terms of a scoring perspective, it is a much better fit than the other two. It's much easier than the other two Pete Dye golf courses, a little bit more wide open off the tee. You have a lot of areas where you can miss. The rough out there is non-existent, so perhaps from a rough perspective, it's not the same, but it simulates the larger fairways, right? Because there's pretty much no rough out there at the PGA West course, it's like you're hitting on these aircraft carrier size fairways like we have at TPC Louisiana. So from a scoring perspective, I do like the comp. Of course, it's a Pete Dye golf course, so similar type of bunkering, similar type of undulation on the greens. Certainly something I'm also using from a comp perspective. That's all I've got for the course breakdown video. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and let me know what you think the winning score is going to be. I'll personally take 22 under par. I expect these guys to go out there, fire some fireworks, make it exciting for us. But go ahead and let me know what winning score you have down below. And as always, going to have you covered for even more golf content throughout the week. So if you're looking for DFS picks, outright betting picks, any of that sort of fun stuff, make sure to stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of that to come. If you haven't already liked the video, make sure you go ahead and do that as well. I appreciate all of the support here, guys. And until next time, best of luck with any bets or outrights that you're placing this week, and let's get this cash.